Alright, so here we are. We're getting started with our first attempt at a screencast lecture for this year. Remember that there's another one on Thursday. Before we get started, a couple of key reminders. Number one, you've got your notes, your note taker. You could have either printed it or you could just be typing it as you're working if you're good at doing two things at once on the computer screen. Remember, you may fast forward, I guess, if you felt like it, or rewind and replay, or hit pause and stop and come back to it as you'd like to. The video is about 20 minutes long. Keep that in mind as you're getting ready to get started here. So our topic for today, our first lecture on industrialism, is on the Industrial Revolution. And remember that the unit question is, what are the benefits and drawbacks of industrialization? Hint, hint, wink, wink. That question may or may not be at the end of the test next Friday. So make sure you're thinking about that as you're going through this and answering your keywords on your note taker as well. Before we get too far into anything else, we wanted to start with giving you some terms that we thought were important for you to understand. The first term that we thought you needed is in your keywords, and it says economy. Economy is basically the selling of things to people within a group based on size. The group has different names, right? Country, county, city. An economy can be really big or really small. You'll notice that on your note taker, there's also a slot where it says, think about it. Where do you take part in the economy? How about your parents? Take some time. I would pause right now, answer that question, because again, that will be collected at the beginning of the class. Also, you'll notice next to your think about it, there's a segment there that says questions. One of the downsides to doing the lectures like this is that we don't get an opportunity to answer your questions in real time as they're happening. So please make sure you write down your questions as we're going through. We'll talk about those at the beginning of class before we collect the note takers. But make sure you write them down. Make sure you ask about them. You're not going to be the only person with those questions, so make sure that you get that taken care of. So again, economy is the exchange of goods. And we want you to do the think about it, so hit the pause button and take care of that. And if you have any questions as we're going along, take care of those in the question section. Next keyword is handmade. Pretty self-explanatory, but important to understand. As we transition into the Industrial Revolution, we get less things being handmade, what we call the putting out system. Try not to laugh. Okay, we have machines making things, and that's industrialism. That's basically the process. The putting out system is people making things by hand. Industrialism is people making things with the assistance of machines. Got a short video here for you on what life was like before the Industrial Revolution. A couple things I'd like you to focus on as she's talking. Number one, she's going to talk about why the Industrial Revolution made life better. Make sure that you get those things written down because that's one of your keywords. And also, she's going to hint at some of the things that caused the Industrial Revolution to happen and some of the changes that it created.
Before the Industrial Revolution began in England around the year 1760, the way most people lived in Europe and America was very different from how they live today. 9 out of 10 people lived in rural areas. There was a large, mostly poor lower class, a small, rich upper class, and not much of a middle class. Rural people raised most of their food on small farms, and they didn't have to leave home each day to work at their jobs. Back then, there were no electric lights, no movies, no telephones, no recorded music, and no cars. Ordinary people used their hands to make most of the things they needed. They had no reason to own a clock, since their lives were tuned to the rising and setting of the sun. The world was pretty quiet before the Industrial Revolution, because there were no machines for rapid transportation to fill the air with noise. Without these devices, people didn't travel much. Consequently, except for their own villages, they knew very little about the world in which they lived. The pace of life was much slower before the Industrial Revolution because people had to walk or use horses to move from place to place. There was no public education, so few people could read and write. And due to poor nutrition and living conditions, They didn't live nearly as long as people do today.
Couple things to make sure that you got from the video. Number one, you should have noticed that everything that people needed in their lives, they basically created in some way, shape, or form on their plot of land, also known as a farm. Okay. The other thing that they did was they didn't live very long, and they didn't travel very much, and they didn't know very much. That's what the benefits of the Industrial Revolution are supposed to be, is that people are living longer, people are getting more education, and they're seeing more of the world. There's more of an exchange of ideas taking place. That's all very important. She also makes a couple of hints about the clock and the transition from daylight and the seasons being kind of what people live their lives by to now a clock. You're going to see that more in the next video that we show you. But just remember, during this time period, the big adjustments are that people now have more food, they're living longer, and they're getting out of their putting out system situation where they're living on a farm doing all the work by themselves. Last key word to make sure that you understand is industry. Kind of important since we're studying industrialism. Okay, this is economic activity concerned with the processing of raw materials and manufacture of goods in factories. What does that really mean? It means making stuff to sell to people. Okay, that's what industry is, making stuff to sell to people. Your think about it for this slide is, what are 3+ things that you use every day that were made in a factory? Go ahead, hit pause, get 3 or more things written down about things that you use every day that were made in factories. Shouldn't be too hard nowadays. Get that done, hit play, and we'll continue on with the rest of the lecture. Okay, this next one, I'm going to have to rewind here a little bit. This next video is going to talk about how life changed as a result of industrialism and people moving out of farms and into factories. So one thing, couple words I want to clue you into. She's going to explain the process of urbanization. She's going to kind of give a quick tip as to what tenements were, and she's also going to refer to some smelting and some other things, keywords from the test. Make sure you're listening for those.
In the late 1700s and early 1800s, large buildings called factories began to appear along rivers in Europe and North America. Factories are places where workers operating expensive, usually very complicated machines, produce manufactured goods. The creation of factories was a turning point in human society because people had to leave home each day to earn a living. This radically changed family life and the way children were raised. New housing for workers had to be built near the factories, and as this happened, cities rapidly grew in size while rural populations decreased. And because people had to meet production deadlines, they were expected to show up at the factories at specific times. This meant that for the first time in history, large numbers of human lives began to be regulated by clocks and the ringing of factory bells. For example, the schedule seen here shows that in 1874, the long workday at the Lowell Mills began at 6:45 in the morning and ended at 6 in the evening, except on Saturday, when it ended at 4:30. On Sunday, however, workers were given a day off.
So some big things that she describes, terms that are going to be on the test. Number one, urbanization. Urbanization is that process of people moving from rural or less populated areas into cities or more populated areas. So urbanization is one of your key words for the test, or one of your terms for the test. Make sure that you understand, again, that that is people moving from rural areas to cities. Another thing that she hints at is she talks about the big buildings that people lived in as factory workers. They're called tenements on your terms for the test. When you think tenements, basically just think really crappy apartment. It's going to be small. It's going to be really cramped. It's going to be not very well made. It's going to be kind of wet inside because it's not, it's got water dripping in it and things like that. So tenement is a crowded version of an apartment, basically. And then she also talks about the change to people living by a clock and having a schedule that they have to live by, which again is that big adjustment. In the video before, she talks about people making all of their stuff for themselves and doing things based on daylight and the seasons. And now, instead, as a result of industrialism, they're making money and then buying all the stuff that they need, and then their life is dominated by the clock. They have to stick to a schedule now. So now we're going to start answering the question, what was the Industrial Revolution? Mr. White found for us an excellent kind of phrasing for this. The Industrial Revolution was the transition to new manufacturing processes that occurred in the period from about 1760 to sometime between 1820 and 1840. This transition included going from hand production methods to machines in factories that held them. So again, the putting out system into the factory system. Those are the differences. Okay, real quick thing on the dates here. The Industrial Revolution happened at different times in different places. It could be argued that there are still countries in the world that have not had or have not taken part in the Industrial Revolution. So this kind of gets chunked out throughout history. But the kind of the dominant part of Western Europe and America going through the Industrial Revolution fits into those dates there that Mr. White provided for us. Thank you, Mr. White. The bigger question is, why did the Industrial Revolution happen? And we've got about 5 kind of key ideas that started the Industrial Revolution. So let's take a look at those here. The first is an explosion of new technology in farming, primarily things that made it so that farmers could do more work in less time or make more food in less time. The benefits of this are obvious. There's more food for everybody. The downsides are that people who own farms aren't getting paid as much money for their product because there's more of it on the market. The result is that a lot of farmers actually end up losing their farms because they're not making any money. So this means that people are losing their farms, and there's some people that don't have any work out in the rural farming areas, and you'll see on cause number 3 how this comes into effect. Along with new farming technology, we also get new ideas about how to farm and ways to make it, again, so that we can make more vegetables and food for people with less work or less space or less people taking part. The 2 ideas that you see on the screen there are the crop rotation and the enclosure system. Basically, what these 2 things do together is they allow farmers to have multiple crops growing at different times during the season. So rather than having one big farm and all it does is grow wheat, and then the rest of the year it's basically useless, they're growing different things at different times. So they're constantly able to create food for people, and it's fresh, and it's more stuff more of the time. And that's the big change in the farming, right? We're getting more farming goods with less work from the farmers. So again, you've got less farmers are needed, which results in perhaps the most important step or important cause of the Industrial Revolution, which is that there's a huge population explosion, which means that there's more people available to do work. The population explosion is basically a result of a couple of things. Number 1, as we said, there's more food available. People are eating more. That means they're healthier. Also, we've got advances in medicine. So you've got more people who are living a little bit longer because they're not dying of, say a cold because their doctor thought the best way to cure their cold was to cut their arm off. So people are living longer and people are eating better. So you get more people around just as a result of people living longer. And then you've got all these farmers that can't find any work anymore. So they move to the cities, and it creates a workforce for the factories, which is important because factories need lots of workers to function properly. Factories do a great job of making products quickly and efficiently, but in order for that to work at its highest peak, it requires there be lots of people working in the factory because they want to break those tasks or those jobs into the smallest segments possible. So just keep that in mind, man. If it wasn't for the population boom that we get in the 1800s, then there's probably no Industrial Revolution. The 4th cause are new technologies that allow for humans to focus their work on doing other things and allow humans to have to do less of the process, right? The conveyor belt is doing a lot of the work, or the automatic screwdriver is doing all the work rather than the human doing all of the work. Another kind of important invention is this thing called smelting, which is one of your terms from the test. Smelting is basically heating iron so that it's so hot it turns into liquid, and then you can pour it into the shape that you want it to be, and then it dries, or it cools. It doesn't dry, it cools, and becomes the shape that you wanted. So you can shape the iron the way that you want to. Okay, so that's a huge technology change right there. And then perhaps, if not the population boom and the harnessing of energy by humans is the key to the Industrial Revolution, our ability to use steam through the burning of fossil fuels, which you'll see from the video, and as you know from climate change, is problematic, has one huge side effect, which is it allows humans to make more stuff, which is what industrialism is all about, making more stuff. So here's a short video on the ability of humans to harness steam power and how that helped the Industrial Revolution.
The switch from water to steam power sped up the Industrial Revolution and led to huge changes in manufacturing, farming, and transportation. Factories that started using steam engines were more efficient than water-powered factories and could be built far away from rivers. Steam engines also began to be used to run machines for mass transportation, such as railroads and steamboats, and this made it possible for people to travel long distances in a very short amount of time. The use of steam engines in farming for things such as threshing grain led to greatly increased food production and helped to revolutionize agriculture. But because steam engines burned wood or coal, smokestacks became a very familiar sight, and air pollution increased to the point that it began to cause serious health problems in the industrial cities. Naturally, as the popularity of steam-powered machines grew, the appetite for coal and iron increased as well. More and more mines were developed to supply industry, and large-scale mining itself resulted in tremendous environmental damage in many parts of the world.
Okay, so she kind of gives the foreboding, uh-oh, here's what's happening with industrialism, but that use of power to make the machines work is an important advancement that allows for the Industrial Revolution. All right, so that's the lecture for today. If something went too fast, make sure that you go back and rewind. If you missed one of the key words, I would go back and look for it. We'll do another one on Thursday, so be prepared for that. We'll start with what the world's first industry was. That's that little circle there that you're looking at. And then we'll talk about some of the other causes, or not causes, results of the Industrial Revolution. Terms to make sure that you got from today: smelting, urbanization, tenements, economy, handmade, and industry. Thanks for your time. Good luck with your note taking, and we will see you next time. Thanks a lot.